Good morning and welcome. My name is Peter Fishman, and I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor, Tootie Fishman, who's here today. I'm also president of Voices of Hope, an organization dedicated to Holocaust and genocide education. Thank you for joining us today at the Mandel JCC's Descendants of the Shoah Speak Up Showcase. Preparing for the next generations to use their own voices to shape the future has always been a goal of Voices of Hope. And standing here today at the 5th Speak Up is a true accomplishment and honor. Please join me in welcoming Matt and Alicia Dix.
For the past 4 weeks, this incredible group of children and grandchildren of survivors has been working on finding and crafting their stories. They participated in a workshop that was led by Matt, who will also tell a story today about his experience with Voices of Hope. And they've been working on telling stories that include part, but not all, of their parent or grandparent stories, because the task of telling the entire thing is too daunting a job. And so they've been working on choosing pieces to embed in their own stories about their own experience. It's kind of like history embedded in personal narrative. Next up we have Alan Berkowitz. Alan is living his second life as a specialist in Holocaust and genocide studies. He conducts workshops and assists educators in creating content to support their students' studies of the Holocaust and genocide. He's also a founding member of Voices of Hope, and most recently he's been very involved in the opening of the Awesome Hero Center, which is on the campus of the University of Hartford. We're going to hear more about that later. Alan's choice for his Jewish imaginary friend, and give him some leeway on this, is Gal Gadot, also known as Wonder Woman. This is what he said about it. You can decide whether you believe him. He said, "My wife Lois, who did speak up, she's a psychologist and she chose Sigmund Freud," which, as a side note, I feel like is a risky choice. That's a lot to have in your ear all the time. But she chose Sigmund Freud. I, on the other hand, chose Gal Gadot, Wonder Woman. Gal is actually Lois's distant cousin. That's crazy. And I believe it's important to be close with family, and also Gal's armored bracelets are very cool. So that's what Alan said. Alan Berkowitz.
Thank you. I don't know how I'm going to follow my colleagues here. It's so difficult. I feel like this is my grist and everybody's in attendance. Okay. It's November 1992. I'm in the kitchen. I'm a businessman, and my wife Lois is a psychologist. She just came home with one of her monthly journals. A Harvard study is looking for participants in a dialogue group. Children of Holocaust survivors and children of Nazis. Lois says, "Thoughts?" I said, "We have to go." She said, "Really? It's in Germany." I said, "Yeah, but I need to know what they are thinking." We go to Harvard for our interview, and 3 people are in a room waiting for us. There's a psychiatrist who has a heavy Italian accent, a psychologist with lipstick on her teeth, and a businesswoman with blonde hair and sharp features. They ask us a lot of questions. Then they asked me, "What do you think of German people?" And I said, "I hate them." The psychologist says, "The woman with sharp features is German." I said, "I thought so." We're driving home, and I turned to Lois and said, "So, how do you think that went?" 3 months later, we're in an airplane on our way to Germany. And I'm looking around at the passengers, trying to determine if some of them might be in our dialogue group. But I really don't know what I'm looking for. We get to Germany, and we take a bus that brings us to a train. And on the train, my subconscious takes over. I'm uncomfortable, and I can't sit down. I'm trying to distract myself, and I see a schnauzer, and a little guy, and I reach over to pet him, and the owner says, "No, he bites." And I think, yes, of course he does. We get to the retreat house, we check in and go to the room, and I start messing around with the locks. There's European locks on the door and metal shades on the windows, and I'm not familiar with them. And Lois, the consummate student of human behavior, says, "What are you doing?" I blurt out, "I need to know how we get out of here quickly if we have to." We don't say anything. We go downstairs. And the German woman asks if I'd like to go for a walk. Her name is Helga. I said, "Sure." And we walk along these nicely groomed paths in the forest. And there's this low-hanging fog that creates a sense of intimacy and privacy. And Helga asks, "What's your story?" I said, what do you mean?" She said, "You know, what happened to your family during the war?" My subconscious takes over again. It's June 22nd, 1941. My father is 12 years old. He's an only child. My grandfather is a lehrer in the cheder. He's a teacher in the school. And my grandmother works in her father's store. They wake to the sound of explosions. They go outside and see the Soviet army is retreating. And Jews with just the clothes on their backs are following them. Panic starts to set in. They knew what was happening in Germany since 1933. They knew what was happening in the other half of Poland these past 21 months. They're not prepared for war. How does anyone prepare for war? The German army arrives and starts shooting people indiscriminately. Shortly after, the Einsatzgruppen comes to Vornovo, the mobile killing squads. They're there with their collaborators. And they forced my grandfather to dig, and others, to dig a large pit that will become a grave. They round up hundreds of Jews and they murder them. It's more than murder. It's unspeakable brutality. My grandfather buries his friends, his neighbors, family members, and the heads of infants and small children that have been severed from their bodies. The Germans keep my family alive because my grandfather can fix things. But they mostly use him for slave labor. The second action, the Einsatzgruppen returns. They force my grandfather and others to dig a new grave. Everyone knows they're going to die. In defiance, a woman wore a beautiful dress. The soldiers shoot and walk away. But not everyone is dead. The woman in the beautiful dress is clawing her way out of the grave. She's injured and disoriented. My grandfather and the others call to her to come to them, but she doesn't hear them, and she stumbles towards the soldiers. An officer pulls his gun and shoots her in the head. She crumbles to the ground. The Germans take the few remaining Jews of Oranova and resettle them in the larger ghetto of Lida, where they slave 12 hours a day, returning to their new homes, exhausted and hungry. Yet they build melinas, hiding places, to try and avoid the roundups in the middle of the night. There's no place to move. It's hard to breathe. Food and water is running out. It's now or never to try and escape. It's a cool, rainy night, September 1943. My grandfather takes 2 children, and my grandmother takes 2 children, and they go underneath the barbed wire. But it catches their clothing and rips their skin. The sentries hear their pain and start shooting. It's a miracle. The bullets miss their mark. My family runs in the darkness, in the rain, towards the forest. But in the chaos, my grandmother and grandfather get separated. Days go by, and my grandfather asks peasants for food. Most turn him away. On the 8th day, it's Erev Rosh Hashanah, the holy Jewish New Year. My grandfather and the 2 children with him see in the distance my grandmother and the 2 children with her, and they're reunited. They walk deeper and deeper into the swampy forest. And after 2 days, in this sea of death and destruction, they come across an oasis. 1,000 Jewish souls who've built a village into the forest. It's the Belsky partisans. Their Jewish brothers and sisters give them food. They give them shelter. And they give them hope. They make my grandfather a shomer, a guard. And it helps to restore his dignity and sense of purpose. I turned to Helga, and the color in her face was gone. I asked, "What's your story?" She says, "My father was an officer in the Einsatzgruppe. He was responsible for liquidating the Jews in Slonim, Boranovici, and Lida." We walk in silence back to the retreat house. Helga says, "Coffee?" I said, "Sure," and sat across from her. She's tense, and her face is beet red. She expects me to reach across this table and to kill her for what her father has done. To avenge my family. To avenge my people. I reach gently and hold her hand, and we cry. And brave Helga says, "We have work to do." Thank you.
Good job,